the Bear and Cheryl Show. Christmas edition, Bear's Book Corner, A Christmas Carol. Well, you knew we were going to do it. Every so often, Bear and I try to do Christmas Carol, and we try and do it justice because it is one of our favorite books of all time. Mostly the first stave, actually, because the words are so extraordinary and the ideas are so extraordinary. We do get to the end of them. I believe stave 3. Is it, or stave 4? Some people say there's 4 staves, but yeah, there's 4 staves. I've seen it done in 3, I believe, though, in an abridged version. So we thought today, because it really is kind of an extension of Bear's Book Corner, on this what actually is Christmas Eve, and I hope people are having a glorious and wonderful time. I must say I'm having a much better time than I thought that I would, and Bear's so happy to have me home. Mwah, sweetness. There he is. So, yes, because you may or may not know, I actually had better fortunes and am working now quite a bit, which is amazing. And one of the amazing, glorious Hallmark Christmas movies, which I watch because I just super enjoy them. I know some of the people don't enjoy them. A couple of my students are like, no, oh, no. I'm like, no, it's amazing. I can't get me enough of them. And I don't care that they're the same. I like that they're the same. I like that there's a hard-driven woman who's, in the city, and then she inherits her, grandmother's bakery, and then she goes home, and then she meets the most beautiful, good-looking man that you've ever seen in the history of the world, who's sweet and awesome, and somehow either wants to buy the bakery from her, or used to be a person that worked at the bakery, or was her grandmother's neighbor, or something like that. And then, she ends up churning out the most beautiful and delicious gingerbread cookies that you ever heard, and then, goes to a contest where she's maybe competing against him or his family. Who knows? And then it all works out in the end. She stays there and makes gingerbread cookies with him and his golden retriever. Yeah. Now that's just a good movie. So it's beautiful. So I like those kind of movies. But watching one of them the other day, because I do watch them, was this wonderful realization that broken things can be mended. It's quite an extraordinary story about this woman. She was a book... No, she wasn't a book publisher, but she was actually an event planner, and she met somebody who actually was a writer. And so she was doing something for a book publisher. That was kind of what it was. And it was this beautiful story about how broken things can be mended, and oftentimes are stronger after they were mended than before they were broken. So, yay! Let's hope that's true. For me, Bear's already perfect, so he doesn't need to worry about that. But he is concerned for me, because I, of course, had that problem. Whew, but of course we are never broken, although it seems as though sometimes we will be. So, yay, I decided to try again to read some of A Christmas Carol, because, as I said, this Christmas is going absolutely so much better. Just had the most wonderful session with my naturopath, who is amazing and helping me enormously. So super happy about that. And he's just a wonderful soul. So here we are, A Christmas Carol, one of my many, many editions. I think I have more of this book than I do of the Christmas story. So we're going to give it a go. Boom. Let's check it out. A Christmas Carol. By Charles Dickens. Now, Charles Dickens did do an engraving, kind of we called them back in the day. He did an inscription, because of course they're the most beautiful book. 1843 has a red cover and actual color illustrations in 1843, which was crazy expensive. So if you can get yourself a copy of one of the original editions, wow, that will set you back a bit of coin of the realm. but I certainly want to get me one. So if anybody knows where I can get one, just let me know. Red cover, illustrations in color on the inside. Yay. So, and he wrote something before the story. Because, of course, originally it was serialized in the newspapers way back in Victorian London. So, that was it. I have endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea, which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves, with each other, or with the season, or with me. May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it. Their faithful friend and servant, Charles Dickens. December 1843, because of course it was a Christmas book, and he was looking to make a bit of coin himself, so he penned this in like a few weeks. And it was an enormous success, actually. People really enjoyed the book, so it was quite an enormous success. A Christmas Carol, Chapter 1. Or we used to call it Stave 1, sometimes, depending on what book you're reading. Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk. Now that's an interesting point. In the UK, it's called clerk, even though it's spelled the same way. C-L-E-R-K. It's not pronounced clerk like it is in the U.S. Now, Canada is a little bit different because sometimes we do some British things, because, of course, being a British Commonwealth member, and sometimes we do borrow from the Americans because they are literally our next-door neighbors. So you can decide which you want to say. I think I'm going to say clerk because it's more of the traditional British. So that's my thought about it. The clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Okay, I have to editorialize a little bit. The word change there actually means exchange, like the stock exchange, which actually existed at that time and was often where Scrooge would go, or men of that time, because he was a money lender. He was involved in investments and money. So he would meet a lot of other money gentlemen at that place, and it was called the Change for short. Mind. I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined, myself, to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade, but the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for, I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come from the story I'm going to relate. If we were not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father, of course by William Shakespeare, died before the play began, there would be nothing more remarkable in his taking a stroll at night in an easterly wind upon his own ramparts than there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out after dark in a breezy spot, say St. Paul's churchyard, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Scrooge, well, he never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterward, above the warehouse door. Although it wasn't really a warehouse, it was more of an office, but still. Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people knew it as a business called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted, hand at the grindstone was Scrooge. squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red. His thin lips blew and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was upon his head and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office, in the dog days, and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he. No falling snow was more intent upon its purpose. No pelting rain less open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of an advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge, well, he never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man and woman ever in all his life inquired such and such a way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, they would tug their owners into doorways and up courts. Then they would wag their tails as though to say, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked. To edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, was what the knowing ones called nuts to Scrooge. Once upon a time, of all the good old days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, weak, and bleak, biting weather, foggy withal. And he could hear the people in the court go outside, wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day. Kind of like the days we've been having lately, where it feels like it's kind of dark most of the day, and then around 3:30 it gets much darker. So if you'd like to, you usually try to get home before 4:30 or 5 so you're not there in the dark. I know I do anyway. So the candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. To see the dingy cloud come drooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard by, and, was brewing on a large scale. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep an eye on his clerk, who, in a little dismal cell beyond a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like just one coal, but he couldn't replenish it, because, Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of a strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" said a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so suddenly that this was his first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" He had so heated himself with this rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome. His eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked. again. Christmas a humbug, Uncle? Surely you don't mean that. I do, said Scrooge. Merry Christmas. What right do you have to be merry? What reason do you have to be merry? You're poor enough. Come then. He returned the nephew gaily. What right do you have to be so dismal? What reason have you to be so morose? You're rich enough. Scrooge, having no better answer ready upon the spur of the moment, said, Bah! Again, and followed it up with the humbug. Don't be cross, Uncle, said the nephew. What else can I be? Returned the uncle, when I live in such a world of fools as this. Merry Christmas. Out upon a Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you? But a time for paying your bills without money. A time for finding yourself a year older and not 1 hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item in 'em through a round dozen a month presented dead against you. If I could work my will, said Scrooge indignantly, every idiot that goes about with Merry Christmas upon his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should. Uncle, pleaded the nephew. Nephew, returned the uncle sternly. Keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine. Keep it? Repeated Scrooge nephew. But you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone then, said Scrooge. Much good may it do you. Much good may it ever have done you. There are a great many things I might have derived good by which I have not profited. I dare say, returned the nephew, Christmas among the rest. But I am sure that I have thought of Christmas time when it has come around, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to that can be apart from it, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open up their shut hearts freely, and to think of other people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold and silver in my pockets, I believe that it has done me good, and it will do me good. And I say, God bless it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Becoming immediately insensible of the impropriety, poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. Let me hear another sound out of you, said Scrooge, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. Quite a powerful speaker, sir. He turned. I wonder why you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, Uncle. Dine with us tomorrow. Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said he would see him in that extremity first. But why? Cried Scrooge's nephew. Why? Why did you get married? Said Scrooge. Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love? Growled Scrooge, as if that was the only thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. Nay, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why can we not be friends? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I am sorry with all of my heart to find you so resolute. We've never had any quarrel to which I have been a party. But I've made my trial in homage to Christmas, and I will keep my Christmas humor to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon, said Scrooge, and a Happy New Year. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. The nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. "There's another fellow," muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. "My clerk. 15 shillings a week and a wife and family, talking about a Merry Christmas. Our tired of Bedlam." Now, you might not know what Bedlam is, but it's actually the Bethlehem Hospital for the mentally ill, which was not a very nice place, obviously, as any of those Victorian mental institutions were. And it was actually shortened to Bedlam because the Bethlehem Hospital for the mentally ill was very big, or something. I believe it was named something like that. And so it became shortened to Bedlam. So that's where we get the word Bedlam from. If you didn't actually know, we get that word meaning chaos or craziness or distress or upset, from the actual very experiences of the people in that pretty much godforsaken place. And the sad business is people used to go there and pay money to visit them. It's quite a sad state of affairs and not a whole lot better now. But we'll see. Let's hope. There are better days ahead. This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephews out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hand and bowed to him. And people wore hats a lot of the time because it was quite cold. And actually the heat of their the heat in their head would just go. So if you wore a hat, especially a good solid hat, it would actually keep the heat in your body a lot more. And not a lot of people maybe know that. "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years," Scrooge replied. "He died 7 years ago, this very night." "We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner," said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head and handed the credentials back. "At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge," said a gentleman, taking up a pen, "it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at this present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir." "Are there no prisons?" asked Scrooge. "Well, plenty of prisons," said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. "And the union workhouses?" demanded Scrooge. "Are they still in operation?" "They are, although I wish I could say they were not." "The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor, then?" said Scrooge. "Both very busy, sir." "Oh, well, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course," said Scrooge. "I am very glad to hear it." "Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christmas cheer of body or mind to the multitude," returned the gentleman, "a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and some means of warmth. We chose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What should I put you down for?" "Nothing," Scrooge replied. "You wish to be anonymous?" "I wish to be left alone," said Scrooge. "Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas time, and I cannot afford to make idle people merry. I help support the establishments that I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there." "Many can't go there, and many would rather die." "Well, if they'd rather die," said Scrooge, "they should better do it, and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that, but you might know it," observed the gentleman. "It's not my business," Scrooge returned. "It's enough for any man to know his own business, and not interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen." Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge returned to his labors with the approved opinion of himself and a more facetious temper than was usual for him. Meanwhile, the fog and the darkness thickened. That people ran about with flaring lamps, proffering their services to go before horses and carriages and conduct them on their way. The ancient tower of a church, with its gruff old bell, was always peeping slyly down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall, became invisible, and struck the hours and quarters and clouds with tremendous vibrations afterwards, as if its teeth were chattering in his frozen head up there. The cold became intense. In the main street, at the corner of the court, some laborers were repairing the gas pipes and had lighted a great fire in their brazier, round which a party of ragged men and boys were gathered, warming their hands and winking their eyes before the blaze in rapture. The water plug being left in solitude, its overflowing sullenly congealed and turned to misanthropic ice. The brightness of the shops where holly springs and berries crackled in the lamp heat of the windows and made pale faces ruddy as they passed. Poulterers' and grocers' trade became a splendid joke, a glorious pageant from which it was next to impossible to believe that such dull principles as bargain and sale had anything to do. The Lord Mayor, in the stronghold of the mighty mansion house, while he gave orders to his 50 cooks and butlers to keep Christmas as a Lord Mayor's house should, and even the little tailor, whom he'd fined 5 shillings on the previous Monday for being drunk and bloodthirsty in the streets, stirred up tomorrow's pudding in his garret, while his lean wife and baby sallied out to buy the beef. Oh, foggier yet, and colder, piercing, searching, biting cold. If the good St. Dunstan had but nipped the evil spirit's nose with such a touch of weather as that, instead of using his familiar weapons, then indeed he would have roared to lusty purpose. The owner of one scant young nose nodded, numbled, and mumbled, "By the hungry cold, as bones are gnawed by dogs," stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. But at the first sound of "God rest ye merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay," Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and even more congenial frost. At the length, the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted that fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat. "You'll want all day tomorrow, I assume," said Scrooge. "If quite convenient, sir." "It's not convenient," said Scrooge, "and it's not fair. If I was to stop you 1/2 crown for it, you'd be considering yourself ill-used, I'll be bound." "And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work." The clerk observed that it was only once a year. "Poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat to the chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier the next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went down a slide cornhill at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honor of it being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play at blind man's bluff. So, there's so much glorious more to actually talk about. But I'm going to leave you to read the rest of it. Scrooge basically has his own melancholy dinner and his own melancholy tavern that he goes and then goes home to bed. And then, of course, mysterious and wondrous things occur. hijinks ensue, as it were. So if you do want to see it, many of the wonderful renditions are on YouTube, and there's most glorious videos that you can look at as well. Some of them for free, some of them on YouTube, some of them on the various streaming services. So I leave you to the glorious Christmas Eve morning, and Bear and I want to say thank you for joining us today. Bear's Book Corner, Bear's Book Corner, Bear's Book Corner right now. Bam, bam, bam. Bear's Book Corner, Bear's Book Corner, Bear's Book Corner right now. Bam, bam, bam. Okay. Bye, everybody.